Audio. Keep warm. Well, you can go now, go. No. Wait a minute. Okay, we've got everyone joining. Awesome, guys. Welcome. It is bucketing rain, so if you can hear a lot of static in the background, I apologize. And again, sorry about my schedule, but it's a very erratic week. So we're going to have, yeah, I'm trying to get it back on track, but unfortunately 8 o'clock Saturday was the only time I could get class going. So I apologize to everybody that was hoping for Wednesday or Friday. Okay, so we are continuing with our wonderful little presentation on Perissodactylans this week. And we're starting slideshow from scratch from the beginning. Okay, so taking from last week, we started with rhinos. You know, chronologically, we should have started off with tapirs, but we started off with rhinos because it seemed apt. This week, we're going back a bit. We're talking about the ancestors of rhinos, which are tapirs. It's a very short little lecture, only about 30 minutes. And we should have a bit of Q&A afterwards if you guys are keen. And because this is quite a short lecture, you guys are welcome to ask questions during the class as well, and we can answer questions as we go. So if you've got a question, I'm quite happy to answer it. Okay, so Perissodactyla. So the book of the week, we didn't do a book of the week last week for some reason, but this week is Canis Africanus, edited by Lars Stittert and Sandra Swart. Really interesting book on the evolution of the African dog, not the wild dog, the domestic dog, and its place in society and Bantu peoples and also modern society. And just, it's just an interesting series of studies and stories about the dog, the common Africanus breed. So going back to where we were last time, to recap, Perissodactylans walk on either 1 or 3 toes. The smaller species are browsers or mixed feeders, and the larger are grazers. And all these species have a simple digestion where they actually absorb the nutrients in their digested in their intestinal tract rather than their stomach. The dentition is rather primitive, as we all knew with rhinos. And compared to even-toed ungulates, they're extremely poor. In fact, there's only 17 species in total, whereas with ungulates, even-toed ungulates, there are several hundred species. Remember, as we talked with the rhinos last time, there were hundreds of species millions of years ago, but gradually they've been outcompeted by the ungulates over the last 20 million years, and they've kind of been phased out, to be honest. Okay, again, a bit of a recap. Radinskia was the first modern Perissodactylan that we know of, and he had dentition and bone patterns that were similar to both horses, rhinos, and tapirs. So we know he was the ancestor of all 3. So it was only a partial fossil, but the best evidence we have, and again, it connected all 3 animals together, all 3 groups of animals. Modern Perissodactylans, again, rhinoceroses, tapirs, which are their ancestors, and off to the side, quite different, the equines, which are the horses and relatives, which we'll do next week. So the first tapir that we knew of was Heptodon, which occurred around 50 million to about 30 million years ago. Obviously, fossil records are never 100% exact, and we know they started appearing around 50 million years ago. They may well have been around before that. And there's a small little guy about the size of a Jack Russell, maybe slightly bigger. Very similar to tapirs, modern tapirs in most appearances, but he didn't have that proboscis and elephant-like trunk that modern tapirs have, but still very similar in all appearances. Tapirs have actually a very rudimentary, very basic foot structure where they've got 4 toes, 1 is vestigial, and they only walk on the 3 toes, whereas modern rhinos, by contrast, walk on fully 3 toes, and horses, equines, walk on 1 middle toe, literally giving them the middle finger as they walk. So, tapirs are really odd and really ugly, and we don't have any in Africa. There's only 4 species alive today. There were numerous species around millions of years ago, and they've gradually just gotten extinct. They're rather large animals. They stand about 1.5 meters tall, and they can weigh around 300 kilograms, so they're not the size of a pig. They're actually substantially bigger than a pig. And although they've never been known to kill anybody, there have been quite a few incidences where they've injured people. There was a zookeeper in 2012 that had his arm ripped off by getting too close to a mother, that he tried to get between the calf and the mother actually ripped his arm off. So, yikes, they can be pretty dangerous, even though they look adorable. They're really weird. They have no relationship to elephants, even though they have the same sort of proboscidean trunk like an elephant. For a long time, they thought they were related until fossil evidence and genetic evidence in the 60s and 70s started pointing out that they just weren't related to elephants in any way. They have another evolutionary convergence. So modern tapirs are the closest living relatives of rhinos, and they separated about 14 million, 42 million years ago. Horses and tapirs separated about 50 million years ago, 52 million, give or take a million. And they're pig-like, very pig-like, again, not related to pigs in any way. Pigs are artiodactyls. And they have a short prehensile trunk, very similar to elephants, and they can actually use them to pick up things just like elephants, but not with the same sort of dexterity. And they're only found in the Americas, Central and South America, not in North America anymore, even though they evolved in North America. And there's only one species in Southeast Asia, which is found throughout Indonesia, Malaysia, and parts of India. And they're considered to be a bit of a living fossil because in the last 20 million years, they just haven't changed. They're in many ways similar to like impalas in the fact that they've just got a good design, it works for them, they don't need to do anything different. And any deviation from their current structure is kind of inferior to what they've got going on. So it's a good system and it works for them. Okay, so they have a proboscis, which is very elephantine, as you can see. Many people would even say this is probably a cousin of an elephant, but again, in no way related. They are related to rhinos. And very odd-looking animal over here. The skull, again, really weird. So that entire structure over there, that's the nasal cavity, which is extended and connected to the lip. They still have incisors and canines, that large gap over there, and very primitive premolar and motor structures, and rather robust jaw for chewing. They don't have that large zygodactyl arc like rhinos have because they're not really competitive fighting creatures. They actually have quite a delicate skull. They usually use that large robust jaw for crushing and chewing vegetation. So there's only 4 species alive today in one genus. And these guys, 3 of the species come from Central and South America and 1 from Asia. And again, there were numerous species in North America where they evolved 50 million years ago. They've all gone extinct. All the artiodactyls and all the other species have just outcompeted them in their native environments. So the one is barred tapir. The other is the South American tapir, very similar, very short proboscideans. The Andean mountain tapir, which has got a rather long proboscis, and the Malaysian tapir. And you'll notice with the Malaysian tapir that they actually have very speckled young. In fact, all the young actually of tapirs are rather mottled and speckled and have this really interesting camouflage. And we'll talk about that later. So tapirs are in many ways similar to forest-like rhinos, to the smaller rhinos. They're mixed feeders and they browse on vegetation rather than being grazers like a white rhino. So again, in terms of their evolutionary ecology, they're not that different from forest-based rhinos. They're very similar. They live in the undergrowth of forest. They stimulate forest growth. We have a question. Who does the digestion match most with? Sorry, who does the digestion match closest with? Ruminants. No. So it's a very simple stomach. So almost pig-like. Pigs have actually probably got the closest equatable stomach. So they've got a sac stomach, an intestine, and a cecum. Remember I showed you the digestion of a rhino last week. It's almost identical to a rhino. In fact, it is, for all intents and purposes, identical to a rhino. So there's a sac stomach, a large intestine with a cecum where they do fermentation. Sorry, I got a question. I've got a question here. I just want to find out what it is. I don't know how to get my chat. So there's the chats. Which kind I meant. Okay, there we go. I hope that answers the question for you. Let's start from there. Is it sharing? Sorry. Okay, so big mixed feeders, they browse vegetation and they stimulate forest growth. If any of you guys know from gardening, if you browse vegetation and you crop it, it actually stimulates new growth, it becomes bushier and heavier. So they stimulate growth. Their preference is for fruit in many cases, and because of their poor digestion, being a sac stomach, they actually aid in seed dispersal. In many ways like an elephant does, and in many ways like the forest rhinos do. So the fruit passes through, they often grind apart the pulp and the flesh from the fruit. the seeds are left intact. They pass through without being broken down, unlike a ruminant, which breaks down everything and passes through, and then defecate in a nice little pile of very fibrous, woody plant material, and with wonderful fertilization going on, and they just add with plant dispersal. So you get in areas where numbers have declined, certain plant species that are reliant on tapirs have started to disappear. Much like areas that are reliant on forest rhinos, certain plant species have started to disappear. So there's a basic ecology. And what's really interesting about them, they're habitual waders. They wade just like hippos. A lot of people don't realize this. So they're often neck deep in the waters of the river, and they're not as big as hippos, but they have a similar ecological role. And in fact, and I said ecological impact, role is always the wrong word, I find, where they actually facilitate dredging and breaking open rivers and allowing for rivers to flow more freely, because they break down detritus and material in the water. So we often talk about animals having a niche, which is a niche is a specific role, for want of a better word, although that's not the right word. It's a specific place that it has within an environment. And it's a set of requirements that it needs and occupies within an environment. So what it needs to survive and what it performs in that environment. So while most organisms have a wide range of requirements that they can live in, they often don't actually use everything that they can live in for a variety of reasons. So niches. So we have in nature, an animal has a niche. It has a certain amount of food that it can operate within, and a certain amount of habitat it can operate within. And it has what's called a fundamental niche. That's the area it can occupy. It has, as long as it's got a certain range of food and a certain range of habitat, it can live within those parameters. However, not everything in life is perfect, and of course there's competition, excluding them from certain amounts of food and certain amounts of habitat. So they're actually excluded from certain areas. So they don't actually have opportunities to interact with all their potential niche. They only have an opportunity to interact with aspects of their niche. Along comes habitat change, of course, with seasons and global warming and erosion, rain patterns change from year to year as well. Habitats change. So of course, what was potentially their habitat over years is also changed. So they're starting to lose aspects of their fundamental niche. Also, you might have a couple bad seasons, droughts, and what would have occasionally been food and habitat available to them has actually changed again. So eventually, what was potentially their fundamental niche, what was fully available to them, is not actually always exploitable. And what they have is a realized niche. This is an area where they perpetually live in and they continue to thrive in. So all the areas that they can potentially thrive in, they won't necessarily occupy for all variety of reasons. And you may have other aspects occupying these alien invasives. You may have new predators or an absence of predators, overbrowsing going on. There could be a variety of reasons why their fundamental niche has not been fully utilized and they're only occupying a realized niche. So everything in nature, we say has a role, but that's actually looking at the wrong way. That's always looking with an intent in nature, and there's no intent. It's an evolutionary process. There's a result of them being in that environment. So we often misunderstand ecological roles. We'll use the word role for it to make sense to us, but nothing in nature, nothing has a role. It has a result of it being there. So tapirs are odd-looking animals, and they're rather specialized. And being specialized in nature is a very bad idea, because you're pretty much heading towards an ecological or an evolutionary dead end. The more specialized you are, the more specific your requirements, and you're probably going to become extinct at some stage. Many people wonder, what is the role of a tapir? And I said, as we discussed, they have roles, they have ecological impacts, but they don't have necessarily a role like someone's given them a contract and you will fulfill this obligation. In nature, nothing has a role, and there's only the result of it actually occurring in that environment. And if a tapir did not exist in that environment, either the environment would change because it was no longer there, they would be browsing on the vegetation, so the vegetation would grow differently, and of course new ecological niches would be created, so new opportunities would be created because of that. Certain fruits wouldn't be spread, so other fruits would be spread in their place. So there's no specific role with golden agendas on the table. It is just simply a series of variables interact with each other. So niches are created by other animals and by the other organisms and taken over by certain organisms. So we need to rethink our mindset with ecology, and I don't like to use the word role. We use it in a casual term, but actually it's it's a bullshit term. Shouldn't use the word role. We should use the ecological result, not the ecological role. So if tapirs did not exist, plants that rely on them would gradually disappear. They would become extinct because their distributor would be extinct, and there would be a vacuum. So other plants would take their place. Simple as that. And new ecological status would occur. There would be an ecological vacuum, and things would take over, and things would create different ecological conditions. In turn, new other organisms would evolve in many cases, like I showed you with those ancient rhinos that were the equivalent of hippos. They would occur millions of years before hippos, but they were the exact same ecological equivalent of hippos. And when they went extinct, hippos evolved in their place. There was a vacuum, and another organism took over the role. So these ecological roles, they're not necessarily, as I said, contract obligations. No one's writing a contract saying you will do this job. There's just a job opportunity, and some animal gradually will evolve to take over that opportunity. And it can take millions of years. So even though we might have a vacuum right now, in millions of years' times, it doesn't affect humans because we won't be around a million years of time. But in millions of years' times, another organism will take over. In millions of years' times, something will take over from the rhinos that are going extinct, and they will perform a similar ecological role. For a long time, the Perissodactylans were the primary browsers and grazers. Now the Artiodactylans are. They're taking over the ecological role. But it's actually the ecological result. So because Perissodactylans are kind of crappy compared to Artiodactylans, they're being outcompeted, and Artiodactylans are just taking over. So tapirs have these really freaking adorable calves. I mean, they're ridiculous. They look like Pokemon. They're super cute. They cover these little splotches all over their face. That's actually his eye over there. Really, really adorable. And they're mottled and broken up like this because when they actually hide in the vegetation and under the jungle growth, they're impossible to find. So another aspect that's also often forgotten by ecologists is the fact that we talked about that counter shading. We also talked about that broken up camouflage. When you're encountering an animal that looks completely different to your typical prey item, you might not register as prey. So if you have a calf that looks completely different to the parent, the predator that might see the parent as prey will not necessarily see the calf as prey, because and they've gone to show that this actually is the case with antelope a lot of the time, because they look completely different to the parent. Predators don't register them as a prey item, and they leave them alone. So there's a lot, it's not always for camouflage, it's sometimes just to look completely different to the parent, and something that might be killing that parent would not necessarily kill the calf, because he doesn't comprehend the calf as a prey item until much later, until much time the calf is actually bigger and stronger to survive on his own. Now, one of my favorite, I always like to talk about extinct animals. Calicotheri was actually a tapir that existed, had a phenomenal innings. He existed for 45 million years. I mean, that is staggering. Humans like to think we're killer and amazing and fantastic. We've been going for about 3 million years as modern humans. In fact, modern humans less than 3 million. There's a few hominids for about 3 million. So Calicotheri was a gigantic, really big cousin of our tapir that existed in North America until about 780,000 years ago. So about the times that modern humans were starting to really stretch their legs around the world. And he was a large, robust animal. He was a knuckle walker. So interesting, completely unrelated to primates. Primates are all knuckle walkers today, as are some bear species. But again, a bit of that convergent evolution where he was actually starting to walk on his front legs like a knuckle walker and using them to grab and pull fruits and branches down. So he had similar, in many ways, a similar sort of evolution to our large primate species. And he was about that size. And you can see a very similar sort of structure to almost a gorilla or an orangutan, but again, completely unrelated. But we have these evolutionary convergences occurring with species all the time because these ecological vacuums happen or exist, and animals will fill those roles given enough time. So Calicothera, another really cool. Last time we talked about Perissodactyla, which was the largest mammal to ever exist. He made an elephant look like a little Jack Russell. This guy wasn't that big, but compared to modern tapirs, he is a bit of a beast. So we also know how tapirs got from North America and how rhinos got from North America and the equines got from North America via the Beringia Straits. It's the same way the cats came across into the Americas and vice versa. It's the same way the elephants came across into the Americas, and how these animals cross backwards and forwards. We talked about that with the deer species and the antelope species last time. Beringia. And again, with the rising and falling ocean levels, with what do you call them, ice ages, these ocean levels rise and fall by a few hundred meters, either opening up grasslands or turning them into oceans. During when the ocean levels are lower, you have this region opening up called Beringia. And again, at the moment, it's completely underwater, but in 30,000 years' time, it should be fully open again, and animals will be able to migrate between the two regions. That's how you got reindeer occurring both in Asia and in North America, and rhinos, which evolved in North America, migrated into Asia. What we don't also talk about, though, is the Great American Interchange, which occurred occurred continuously over the last 50 million years ago, but it really escalated about 2.7 million years ago, when North America and South America fully connected, when they became pretty much completely landlocked with each other. Before 2.7 million years ago, there were a series of islands between North America and South America, but they were not fully connected. And it was very difficult for animal species to migrate between these two regions. And you had Laurasian therians and you had the xenotherians occupying these two continents and never really interacting with each other. Now, the Great American Interchange, it facilitated the exchange of Laurasian therians from North America and marsupials. Remember, the marsupials evolved in North America and migrated via Beringia into Australia. We did that in the very first lesson about 3 months ago. But it also allowed xerotherians to actually migrate from South America into North America. It only happened fairly recently, which is why we don't have any of those weird South American animals occurring throughout the rest of the world yet. There are just some South American animals occurring in North America. The armadillos, the sloths, and all those weird South American animals that we talk about, those anteaters as well. And they occur in North America. Gradually, over millions of years, they will disperse into the old world via Beringia as well. But it only happened 2.7 million years ago, so they still have only really stayed in North America from migrating. So what this was the Isthmus of Panama. So there was a series of islands about 20 million years ago. About 15 million years ago, these islands started to connect up with each other through volcanic activity. They fully connected with each other around 2.7 million years ago and completely landlocked through Panama. We all know what Panama is. We have the Panama Canal today. And that connected North America and South America and allowed complete migrations of species between North America and South America. And that's how tapirs gradually dispersed into South America. Ironically, tapirs went extinct in North America and they only survive in South America and one species in Asia. So that was the Great American Interchange, another little bit of ecology. All right, so that was a short and sweet lesson. We're only doing tapirs today. I hope you enjoyed it. We're doing horses next week, which is much longer. We can do a bit of a Q&A now. If you guys have any questions, you're welcome to unmute your microphones and go nuts. Anything to say? Hello. Sorry, I got someone in the back end. T-A-P-I-R. Anything to say, guys? Questions, chats? No chats, no questions?
No, Nick, just to say thank you. It's very informative, enjoying it a lot. Saturday evening and my brain is a little bit too slow for questions, but just generally thanks for everything so far. It's been good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I said, I'm a bit of a scheduling challenge at the moment. I've had tons of work this week. I haven't had a chance. I was planning to put equines into the same lecture. I just also thought, there's a lot of ground to cover with equines. It would just be a rush session in 40 minutes. We'd rather do a 20-minute session just on tapirs and just a bit of ecology as well and throw it in to make it interesting. Yeah, so if you guys don't have any questions, I'm going to wrap it up then. I was hoping for a bit of a Q&A afterwards because I figured there would be Q&A as well because it's Saturday night. Nothing from anybody else? Willie, Anton, Shane, Nick, nothing? No, Nick has nothing to say because he's been talking for the last 20 minutes. Yeah, okay, so we will continue with horses next week. So that's Perissodactylans. And then we're done with Perissodactylans and we're going to start getting onto, I'm thinking we're going to probably start doing some elephants after that, the Afrotherians. So getting into the elephants, and there's a lot to cover with elephants. So we've got one more class of the proboscideans. I mean, it's not proboscideans, Perissodactylans, and then we get on to the Acrotherians, starting with elephants, because they're probably everyone's favorite Acrotherian. They also do weird things like aardvarks and shrews and all stuff like that, but that's a wider story. Cool, guys. Well, thanks so much for popping by. Hope you enjoyed that. Anything else? Auf Wiedersehen. Adios. Arrivederci. Bye-bye. Zaijian. Okay. Zaijian. Sayonara. Ambagaya. And so on. Cheers, guys. Good night.